Good afternoon. My name is Marcos Kreb, and I have the pleasure to chair the keynote lecture today by Sergei Guriev. Unfortunately, as we all know, Sergei couldn't be with us, so he's talking to us in Paris. We don't know each other. Nice meeting you virtually, if not otherwise. And I would like to greet all those that are joining us online. As you know, this is a hybrid session, so there'll be part of participants online who will be able to ask questions via the chat box. Not to take too much time of Sergei's lecture, let me just say a couple of words about him. Sergei is now, as you know, teaching at the Sciences Po in Paris. He is the director there of the PhD program. And at the same time, he is one of the researchers at Center of Economic and Policy Research, member of the International Economic Association, and a lot of other functions. But what I would like especially to stress out, that what I've seen in his CV, during his education, he is a trained physicist who then got a PhD in math and ended up in economics, which is a very powerful combination, actually, to be nominated for Nobel Prize in economics, probably, because Paul Samuelson and others all got very high mathematical training. However, he turned out to be an excellent and very productive academic. As extremely interesting is that the topics he has chosen for his work is not what one would call mainstream topics, like doing some very complicated modeling of third derivative or whatever type of new model. But let me just read a couple of titles of his papers. The Role of Oligarchs in Russian Capitalism, published in Journal of Economic Perspectives. Unhappiness in transition. Well, we can all talk about that. Why resource-poor dictators allow freer media. European trust crisis. Informational autocrats. 3G internet and confidence in government. And finally, his big work coming recently, which will be published soon, Political Economy of Populism. But what I'm particularly interested in is checking and sharing alt facts. I doubt that Mrs. Conway, who was advisor to President Trump when she used the word alternative facts, dreamed of famous academician Sergei Guriev using this expression in his speech. Anyway, I have to warn you that we already warmed up to the topic of corruption by Mr. Uberti, and there was a very lively discussion, so you can expect a lot of questions. And now, without further ado, I would ask you for the house rules, if you can focus your lecture on about 45 minutes to leave time for questions. So thank you for joining us, if nothing virtually.
Thank you very much, Marco, and thank you, Elodie, for inviting me. This is really a special event for me. I knew Oleh, and it's a great privilege to give this talk in the conference in his memory. I think Oleh was an example for many of us, for me for sure, working in policy, working in academia, using the knowledge from the two to help all, and staying a very dedicated, committed, honest person. Our profession is great, and I like many of my colleagues, but I really feel that there is a gap after Oleh passed away. Now, the last time I saw Oleh was exactly in the room, I think, where you were sitting, and that was January 2020. That was last time when I went to United Kingdom. Since then, my visa has expired, and actually tried to come very hard. I applied for a visa. UK government said you cannot apply earlier than 3 months before the travel. So I did, but then it turns out that UK government can actually give you visa after 3 months. So I still don't have the visa, so I cannot travel after 3 months since my application. Whatever reason for that is, I'm sorry not to be with you, but to compensate for this, I will show you certain things that are related to Oleh. First and foremost, let me let me show you this picture that we took, I think, in the same building, where you see Oleh in the center, and I'm there behind him, and I think it was a very exciting conference. I guess many people in this picture are now in the room, meeting Oleh like I did, and I also enjoyed the discussion. I was a discussant of Oleh's paper, so one of the things I would show you is how discussion helped to improve quality of his chapter. So when I received his paper, figure number 2 looked like this. So that was the figure in the paper, literally showing the trends and Gini in FSU and Central and Eastern and Europe and Baltics, and we laughed a lot about that. Eventually, unfortunately, the figure in the book is much more mundane, just like this. Yeah. So with that, I should say that I'm very happy that I've contributed to this book, and I'm holding this book in front of me. It's a very thick book, and I'm really grateful to LOG to make sure that this book was eventually published. I'm very proud I have a chapter in here, as well as several chapters by Oleh, one of which I was a discussant of when I last saw him. Thanks again for inviting me to give this talk, and I'm sorry again I cannot be with you in person. Now, turning to the issue of corruption, so the topic that we chose together with LOD for my talk, I think this is again an issue that Oleh deeply cared about. He knew that in many transition countries, corruption turned out to be one of the main challenges of post-communist transition. He actually writes about that in his chapter in this book. So this is something that I'm going to tell you about. So this is the most comprehensive study of corruption ever made. So I'm fortunate to have worked on this with Ray Fishman, one of the top scholars of corruption, and my former colleagues at the BRD, Caroline Yeramasvili, who's now who used to work at the BRD, then she graduated from London School of Economies, and she's now in Birmingham, and Alex Plekhanov, who's still working as a director of transition impact and macroeconomics in EBRD. So what do we do in this paper? We look at all the enterprise surveys in the world. But before going there, I would say that it is not trivial to answer whether corruption is good or bad for firm growth. So our question will be how firms located in more corrupt environments grow faster or slower, and why. And we provide you the evidence from all enterprise surveys ever done by World Bank or its partners. So I'll tell you the numbers later on, but we look at something like 90,000 firms over 15 years. But before going there, I'll just reiterate the famous argument that sometimes you may actually wish to have corruption, which may be grease in the wheel. So if you just ask an economist if corruption is good or bad for economic performance, of course, economists would say, sure, should be really bad. On the other hand, there is always a practical man or a political scientist who can tell you, wow, if bureaucracy is very rigid, maybe you want some corruption to grease the wheels of this bureaucracy. And there is a famous quote from Huntington's book, Political Order in Changing Societies. So in terms of economic growth, the only thing worse than a rigid, over-centralized, dishonest bureaucracy is rigid, over-centralized, honest bureaucracy. Now, do we have evidence for that? As you know, it's very hard to find causal evidence at the country level, simply because we have too few observations and too many things are correlated with corruption and economic performance. There was a paper by Paulo Malo, who's now top executive, top economist in the fiscal department, director of fiscal department of the IMF. This is a paper published in Quarterly Journal of Economics, which kind of tries to provide a causal relationship that corruption is harmful for growth. That identification strategy was excellent for the 1990s, but now it would be really criticized. Subsequent papers may find significant relations may find no significant relation. In our transition report in 2019, we actually found some significant relationship. But whether you can make a causal statement is a different question. Now, at the firm level, you have many more observations, and you can actually try to do something more sophisticated. Most of the studies that look at the firm level are actually one-country studies. The famous study by Fishman and Svensson, published in 2007, is a study of enterprise surveys in Uganda, where they use instrumental variable strategies that shows that corruption is 3 times as harmful for economic growth at the firm level than taxation. So if you measure corruption as a share of sales and taxes as a share of sales, each percentage point of taxation is 3 times less harmful than 1 percentage point of bribe as a share of sales. The more recent paper by Bai and co-authors look at Vietnam, where they look at the opposite causal relationship, where firm growth reduces corruption. So that is a paper I will refer to several times, but let me actually tell you what we did rather than what other people did. So I think it's a good paper for a keynote talk because it really is a very simple descriptive paper, no complex identification strategy, and yet we find something robust, interesting, and unexpected. So once again, what we do, we take all enterprise surveys, which are surveys of firms around the world, usually a representative survey of enterprises in a country. These are formal enterprises, remember that, right? So we don't survey informal. About 140 countries in 3 waves. Each wave is like 5-year wave. Most of the surveys are either World Bank or World Bank with a partner, right? EBRD or Inter-American Development Bank or national development institutions. And so these surveys put together are very useful because the surveys are comparable. Questions are the same. And you can actually put together this full data set, which surprisingly nobody has done before. Well, it's not surprising because it's been a lot of work. Still, even though the surveys are comparable, still every survey is slightly different. So you need to match the identifiers. Now, the data are freely available, by the way, at enterprisesurveys.org. Now, we will not make any causal claims, but I'll sketch a simple theoretical model which will help us to make sense of what we find. Because what we find, as I said, is not what we initially thought we would. So this is one slide, one takeaway that you need, and after you learn it, you can think about other issues. But these are the 3 main takeaways from what we learned. So we look at terms and we control for region, sector, year, fixed effect. So we compare not a firm in Russia to a firm in Bosnia. We compare firms in the same regions of Russia, in the same industry, and in the same year. Okay. And so these are 2 similar firms. And for these 2 similar firms, we control for things like size, some other controls that I'm going to show you. For example, propensity to complain in general. That is also very important for us. And we try to see the correlation between share of bribes in sales and growth. And we distinguish between 2 variables. One is whether the firm gives bribes or not. And the second, the intensity of bribery. So the share of bribes in sales. So 2 variables. One will be non-zero bribes, and the other one for firms that have non-zero bribes, positive bribes. How increase an additional percentage of sales in terms of bribes is stated with growth. So the answer is as follows. On average, in this universe of 140 countries, now most of these countries are not high-income countries, right? Because these are the countries that World Bank is interested in. But basically, in this universe of 140 countries, firms that pay bribes actually grow faster. Firms that have zero bribes grow lower. So there is a zero bribe penalty for firm growth. Okay. Second finding is once you pay bribes, each additional bribe decreases growth. So I'll show you the picture so it will be much easier to visualize. So, but in general, the thing is don't pay bribes, things are bad. Start paying bribes a little bit, things are better. But every additional bribe as a percentage of sales is problematic. And finally, we look at the heterogeneity of this effect, and we find that the zero bribe penalty is borne by firms in high corruption countries. If you are in a country which is clean, there is no zero bribe penalty. The second point works in both high corruption countries and low corruption countries. So in high corruption countries, there is a very strong nonlinear relation. Zero bribe brings a huge penalty in terms of growth. Smaller bribes are better than zero bribes. Bigger bribes are worse than small bribes. In low corruption countries, zero bribe is good, small bribe is a bit worse, big bribe is even worse. So this is the finding. So these are three facts which are extremely robust to various specifications, various definitions, various level of granularity. And these are the findings that I would like you to take away from my talk. Okay. So let me jump into the discussion. By the way, LOD can follow the questions on chat, and I guess Marka, if you see somebody raising a hand, I'm happy to stop and answer questions. But let me first say what we do. So once again, initially we have 167,000 firms, but when you look at firms which have responses on corruption, and I'll show you the question on corruption, the sample goes down by half. It's not just corruption. We actually, in the paper, we describe which questions are costly in terms of losing observations. But in the end of the day, 90,000 firms is a lot of firms. So these are face-to-face interviews with owners and senior managers, 140 countries. Median control of corruption is minus 0.43. Those of you who know the data from the World Bank at country level measures of corruption, control of corruption is one of those worldwide governance indicators which is normalized to zero. So in any given year, average control of corruption in the world is zero. And then it is also normalized to one unit being one standard deviation. So minus 0.4 means that our median country is half standard deviation more corrupt than other countries in the world. The minus means more corrupt. Control of corruption is a good thing, right? So this is what we have. Now, do we have high income countries? Yeah, we do have Estonia, for example, or we have Germany and Italy. In some of the surveys, we use the high income countries to be benchmarked. But all the Central Eastern Baltic countries are here. So once they are high income countries, they're still in the top. Right? The cleanest countries, by the way. So this is the corruption question. Corruption question is asked in an indirect way, and this is a great innovation of enterprise survey. Remember, these are the surveys which are initially called BEEP, Business Environment Enterprise Performance Surveys. And the idea there was not to ask how much you pay in bribes. The question is how much other firms who like yours pay in informal payments of gifts to public officials. Okay, and the firms can choose whether to answer as a percentage of total annual sales or in absolute amount in dollars. And basically, as you will see, most of them actually answer as a percentage and will use the data on percentages. But when they answer, about 15% of firms answer in terms of total annual value in dollars, absolute amount of bribes, we convert this amount into percentages and still use that. Now, average bribe share of sales is less than 1 percentage point. And in cleanest countries, it's literally zero. In most advanced economies, it's 1% of 1%. And there are some countries where you have several percentage points, okay, on average in a country. And then there are firms which have 10% and 20%. We kick out the observations with 50%, but still. Now, I should say that these numbers are not crazy. We find a strong correlation with country level measures, and I'll show you the graph. Before going there, I should say that there is another question on corruption, which is corruption a barrier to business? Overall, these surveys are about barriers to business. And so you can ask, is access to electricity, is lack of access to electricity a barrier to business? Is tax administration a barrier to business? Is political instability a barrier to business? And all these barriers are ranked from 0 to 4, 0, no obstacle, then minor obstacle, moderate obstacle, severe obstacle, and very severe obstacle, right? And we will use this question for a very important person, you'll see, but this is not our main dependent variable. You'll see that. So these are the graphs I promised you. Correlation between country level corruption from worldwide governance indicators, control of corruption. Remember, I mentioned it to you that it's normalized at 0 in the world. And -2 means 2 standard deviation most corrupt countries, +2 the cleanest countries in the world who have corruption at the level of 2 standard deviations above the average. So the Norways of this world would be here. And this is basically this one. The size is the sample, how many observations we have in a given country. And so you see a negative correlation between country level measure, which comes from a different data set, and the share of firms in our data set reporting non-zero bribe. So in Estonia, almost nobody pays bribe. In most corrupt countries, 60% of firms say we pay positive bribe. Well, they don't say we, they say firms like us. Okay? This is average bribe share as a share of sales. So there are firms which pay 20%. As I said, we picked out firms with 50%. These are firms averaged out by countries. Each dot here is a country. And again, you see a negative correlation between corruption, control of corruption score, and average bribe share, right? For those who pay non-zero bribe. Then this question that I mentioned is you have complaints about corruption by firms making and not making bribes. So these are firms which pay bribes. And you see a lot of them say corruption is an obstacle, and they also have negative correlation. And this is a comparable graph, but firms who complain about corruption by pay 0 bribes. And these firms also complain, and they actually complain a lot in countries which are corrupt. And this is a very important point that I would like to mention, because this is where we will make one of our arguments that firms who don't pay bribes may still suffer from corruption. Why and how? That will become clear very soon. So there is a question in the chat, which is feel free to ask questions in the chat. So please ask questions. There are also questions in Q&A that you can also post. Okay, so these are the aggregate data. Now let me show you the distribution of these responses. So when we ask people, what is the percentage of sales you pay in bribes? You see that most of them use round numbers. 9%, 8%, 7%, 6%, a lot say 5%, a lot say 2%, a lot say 1%, and very few in between. So most of them talk in terms of percentages. And just to zoom in at things close to 0, here is what it looks like close to 0. So again, here you see a round number. This is half a percentage point. This is 0.4%. This is 0.2%, and this is 0. A lot of 0, right? So there is a lot going on in terms of given answers, which are percentages. But there are also non-round numbers, which are responses for the firms who tell us this year, a firm like this pays $100,000 in bribes. And then we divide by the annual sales, and we get a non-round number. Okay? So this is just to give you the 3 ways how they behave. So again, since a lot of firms don't pay bribes, it's important to look at how many do and what are the average bribe share for those who pay bribes and for the whole sample. And you see that on average, bribe share has decreased from 10% to 6%. From 1% to then 0.7% to then 0.6%. So it's below 1%, right? However, if you look at firms that pay bribes, look just at the subsample of firms with positive bribes, you see that the bribe share has not actually declined. For firms with positive bribes, the bribe share, if anything, increased from 5% to 6%. What has changed is the firms who report non-zero bribe share. That number went down from 21% to 13% to 10%. And because of that, the sample average has declined. So this is what it is. Okay. So just a very quick question. What we do, we run a regression, a panel regression with dummies for each firm. We control for fixed effects for subnational region, sector, and gate. This is the most sophisticated technology we are using in this paper, fixed effects at a very granular level. Sector, subnational region, year. And there are 5,000 of those fixed effects. So on average, within each of such cells, we have something like 16 firms, 18 firms, right? So we compare those firms to each other. We don't compare services firms to construction firms. We compare construction firms in the same region of Russia in the same year. So that's what it is. What do we control? We control log size, log sales, log employment. We control for ownership time. We control for age. We control for exporter status, and we control for kvetch factor. Now, I'm not sure how many of you speak Yiddish, but kvetch is a term in this literature which refers to propensity to complain. I guess it goes back to Danny Kaufman or Hellman, who probably spoke Yiddish very well, and or at least knew Yiddish or still know Yiddish well enough. So they introduced this thing where we actually look at complaints on national factors such as taxes, right? Everybody wants to complain about taxes, but some people can complain more. And so if you have two similar firms which face the same tax system and one of them complains more, we think that maybe it's a psychological problem of the manager of the firm. So we want to control for this, which we do. And this is what this literature does, and this is what we do. Okay. So, but that's a very simple regression, and you'll see what we get. So our dependent variable is annual sales in growth. Annual sales growth, annual growth in sales. So whenever we say the magnitude will be in terms of percentages of growth year on year. Okay. So let me walk you through the main results and then show you some graphs. So when we just run a regression on bribe share, which we call informal payments, sometimes we call it bribe share, sometimes we call it informal payment. Sorry for being confusing. There is no significant relationship. When we introduce dummy for non-zero informal payments, just say, let's compare firms that pay bribe and don't pay bribe. We see that firms which pay non-zero bribe grow 1% faster, 1% per year faster. And so then we do both. So we actually include both the dummy for non-zero informal payments and then the continuous variable for the bribe share. And so this is column 3, where you see that when you move from zero payments to non-zero payments to epsilon payments, for example, of bribes, your growth rate jumps up by 2 percentage points. But then every additional percentage of sales as a bribe decreases your growth. And I'll show you a graph in a second. Now, what I would say is once we add all controls, the magnitudes change a little bit, and that's fine. But basically, when you move from 0 to epsilon bribe, your growth rate goes up by 2 percentage points, and then it goes down. And by the time when your bribe share is something like 10% of sales, you go back to the previous level. So it's a more sophisticated regression, but it's actually easier to see this regression as a graph. So actually, let me show you this graph. So what is this graph? So this graph tells you the coefficient on the sales growth for the dummy of bribes being above 0 but below % of a %. below 0.01% of sales. Then the next category is 0.01% to 0.03%, and so on and so forth. So, for example, this is a category between 0.5 percentage point of sales to 1 percentage point of sales. This is from 1 to 5%. This is from 5 to 10%. And this is above 10%, right? Zero here is the omitted category, which is firms that don't pay bribes. And that's exactly what I told you. Once you move from no bribe to very small bribe, your growth jumps by 8% and about 10%. And then it slightly goes down. The main decline happens somewhere around 0.5 percentage point. And then eventually it goes down below the initial level. Remember, I told you about 10% of bribe, bringing you back to the level of zero bribe. We reach it at around 5–10%. So that's what it is. So this is a very complex relationship, which we estimate. And this is this robust nonlinear relationship. So zero means zero bribe here. When you move from zero, let me actually draw this line using the opportunity of this. So if you don't pay bribes, if you don't pay bribes, you're at zero. And then when you move from zero bribes to small bribes, in Oleh Havrylyshyn's style of drawing pictures, and this is the jump that you get, 8 percentage point jump. And then for small bribes, you remain in the range of 5 to 10 percentage points higher growth, faster growth than at zero bribe. Okay, so so let me go on. So these are these coefficients in terms of table rather than graph. Let me see that. Now let me say something that I mentioned already. So basically, this pattern of jump and then decline is actually very different in high corruption economies and low corruption economies. So what we do here, we split the sample into countries which are above median corruption and below median corruption, and we call them high corruption economies and low corruption economies. We also in the paper do that for 4 categories, for 3 categories. We actually do a lot more sophisticated stuff, but to stay simple, let me just say that high corruption economies are the ones which drive this nonlinear relationship. So for high corruption economies, there is a jump of 3%, and then gradual decline with each additional bribe share going down. Okay, so there is this non-zero informal payment, which is good for growth. And if you have zero, you're 3 percentage points slower growing firm than firms that give very small bribes. And basically, this is a more granular relationship, which tells you when you move from zero to less than 0.5 percentage point, the growth rate jumps by 6%, then 2%, then 0, and then goes down all the way to 0. In low corruption economies, the situation is actually different. There is no non-zero dummy impact. So when you compare zero bribes and small bribes, the coefficient is 0, and it's not just, it's not significant, it's literally 0 in magnitude as well. And then you have a very strong effect of declining growth as bribes increase. So that's the story. That's the third part that I would like to make. Now, I won't have much time to do that, but one thing I would say is, interestingly, these results are driven mostly by firms that complain about corruption. The firms who say that corruption is not an obstacle or a minor obstacle are the firms where effects are weaker and marginally significant or not significant at all. So, and the firms that complain are the ones which look similar in terms of the split between high corruption economies and low corruption economies to the whole sample. So it's a similarity. Anyway, so let me speak a little bit about the model. I won't have time to go through the whole model, but just to give you a spirit how we reconcile those results. Once again, we have this graph here, which is, as I said, very robust. Whatever functional form you use, whatever things you do, For high corruption economies, the graph is like this. For low corruption economies, the graph is actually like this. It starts at 0 and goes down all the way, right? And this is how it works. There is no jump at 0. So that's what we find, and this result is extremely robust. Now the question is, how do we reconcile this with whatever mechanism that can be in place? What do we argue? How can we understand those results? So let me quickly say a few words about them all. So the way we think about what's going on is we have an honest principle, public, or the president of the country, or the boss of the bureaucrat, who operates as follows. In a low corruption country, if this principal receives a complaint that bureaucrat is corrupt, the principal fires the bureaucrat and punishes the bureaucrat. If the country is corrupt, if the boss of the bureaucrat receives a complaint, the bureaucrat is only fired with probability 1 minus k, where k is the country level measure of corruption. So if corruption is really, really high, bureaucrats don't care if their counterparts complain about it. If corruption is really low, then they should be afraid that the complaints may come up. Okay. Now, where do complaints come from? So we have a corrupt bureaucrat who extorts bribes from firms. And basically, a bureaucrat faces a universe of firms, and the bureaucrat says, pay me 5%, or pay me 2%, or and basically, the bureaucrat doesn't observe the characteristics of the firm, so the bureaucrat, as usual, faces a typical monopoly problem. If I charge the bribe rate, which is too high, some firms would prefer to close down. If I charge too low, then I will not collect enough price. So it's kind of a monopolist talking to its client. Now, what is important here as well is the firm can complain to the principal. So the firm figures out, okay, the bureaucrat is extorting bribes from me, but how about I say no to the bureaucrat and complain? And if you complain, depending on this parameter k, you may succeed or you may fail. So what happens? So basically, each firm can invest in a growth opportunity. This growth opportunity may be taxed by a bribe, and don't look at the formulas too much, but basically, my job is to think, should I invest or not, given the bribe, and given the probability of a successful complaint. And this is how it works. So the firm comes to a bureaucrat. The bureaucrat says, pay me share B of your sales, or I will block your project. Okay? And so the offer is the same for all firms. I can talk about that later. Then if the firm chooses whether to accept and reject the offer, so if the firm accepts, just pays the bribe and invest in the project. The firm understands that because of the bribe, it will distort its investment, and so it's inefficient because it's a distorted tax. Corruption is a distorted tax, and so the firm underinvests, and so that's not great. And the profit suffers. However, the firm can also reject and complain. In a corrupt country, the complaint is neglected. The bureaucrat comes to the firm and says, sorry, I blocked your growth opportunity, and everybody gets zero because nothing is produced, so the bribe is not paid. Everybody's unhappy, but at least bureaucrat is not fired. If the country is sufficiently not corrupt, bureaucrat is fired, bribe is not paid, the project goes through, and bureaucrat is punished, pays a non-pecuniary cost of punishment, right? And D is an individual parameter which eventually measures the bureaucrat's individual propensity to charge bribe. I have a question by Imogen on Q&A, but I'll answer it in the end because I think it's a general question which is best to discuss later. Okay, so that's the model, and when we solve the model, we actually find exactly what we find in the data, where we find that basically in a clean country there is no zero bribe penalty. In a corrupt country, non-bribers are very likely to be punished. And so there is a group of firms that complain, they take a chance of complaining, and they're punished because the country is corrupt and a lot of complaints are neglected. And so these are the firms that know that corruption is a problem in the economy. They suffer from corruption because their complaint is neglected, and they pay zero bribe. So these are the firms which drive our results. These are non-bribers who suffer from corruption, even though they don't pay bribe. And then, of course, because of this distorted nature of the tax, of the bribe tax, of course, we also have this negative coefficient that explains why for positive bribes and growth are negatively correlated. So let me skip that. Now, let me say a few words. I still have 7 minutes, so let me say a few words about alternative explanation. So we got a lot of questions. Of course, we cannot pretend that we have causality, but the benefit of our analysis is it's a huge data set, it's descriptive analysis. It uses all the data that can be used, and it tells you something that we didn't know before. Well, we didn't expect to find that. And then people ask, can you explain it somehow differently? Are the data consistent with something else? And so one thing is, can the causal relationship be in the opposite direction? So it's not that bribe cures growth, but instead maybe the bureaucrat observes growth or potential growth and targets more ambitious firms. And so interestingly, that is not consistent with the data, because if you grow faster, I should ask larger bribes from you. Okay? But this is not what we find. When we actually look not just at bribe share, but at total bribe amount, it's actually negatively correlated with growth. One thing which is important is that size is not correlated with bribery, but profit rate, profit margin are correlated with bribery. But what we show in the model is that this is what we predict. We endogenously predict that more profitable firms are more likely to accept the offer to pay the bribe. Why? Because they keep the share of the profit. They don't risk to have zero profit. And so we show in the model that more profitable firms should be positive bribers, less profitable firms should be zero bribe. So that's what we find in the model anyway. So one other thing is, okay, so if this explanation with targeting successful firms is not great, we need to figure out something something which drives negative correlation. So this explanation the first explanation on the top, may explain the zero bribe penalty. Why? Because I look at slow growing firms and I say, I will not ask you for bribes because you don't have money, I cannot take a lot of bribes from you. I look at a fast growing firm and I ask for a positive bribe, right? So you can explain bribe dummies positive effect, non-zero bribe dummies positive effect, but you cannot explain the relationship between magnitude of the bribe and growth. So you need something else, and one option could be that maybe the bureaucrat is actually afraid of asking for very high bribe because that attracts attention and may result in punishment. So this is a mechanism which is kind of similar to what we do. But what is important in this mechanism is that, yes, you can create a negative correlation between bribes and growth, because the bigger the bribe, the more likely you are to be punished, so you have to be careful. But what is important about this? If you ask your question, to what extent this issue is more likely to be observed in very corrupt countries, the answer is no. Punishments are features of least corrupt countries. So this is what we think is not consistent with the data. We also look at some other explanations, some other alternative explanations. So, for example, some people would say that maybe bribes are set as fixed fee rather than a share, but we actually show that we find a negative correlation between the total bribes and firm growth. So it's not just different firms pay different amounts, but it's also negatively correlated with firm growth, which is not part of this model. And then we do something else, more sophisticated second-degree class discrimination. So basically, we show that models where bureaucrats set up very complex contracts are not consistent with the data. And we explain that by the fact that, well, these are, after all, are not enforceable contracts. So it's very complex contracts are unlikely to be set up. So let me skip this table and arrive at the conclusion so we have more time for questions. So we study this relationship on a global data set. We control for very detailed cells, industry region year cells, and we find a nonlinear relation. Firms with zero informal payments go slow. Firms with non-zero bribe payments grow faster. But once you have a positive bribe, further increase in bribe decreases growth. And that, in fact, the intensive margin, the effect of additional bribes destroying growth is observed around the world. High corruption countries and low corruption countries. But this zero bribe penalty, the fact that people who don't pay bribes are punished, this is only observed in high corruption countries. And we explain it by this argument that these are the firms that rationally take their chances and reject the bribe, and that they are punished by the bureaucrat. And in a corrupt country, the bureaucrat is likely to get away with that. So this is where we are. So let me conclude here and take your questions. I guess I have already several questions. There is a question about the slide deck. I will send the slide deck and the paper. The paper provides all the tables, all the graphs as well. There are many more tables. And there is a question by Imogen. But I'm happy to stop here and just take your question. You tell me. Yeah.
Thank you so much. First, there was a round of applause. If you haven't heard us, I would ask you to repeat it.
Thank you.
As a chair, first of all, I'm impressed by your magnum opus, which you managed to present to us in less than 45 minutes. I will not, before opening floor, just say that I was personally very surprised by the issue that it pays to start paying bribes. But then I was reassured that the bribe, like other economic issues, is subject to law of diminishing returns. So that's certainly comforting for us. So let me start first by opening the floor to question. I see here one question, and then we'll go to the website. Yes, three of you. Okay, please. Yeah, you will be first.
Sergei, do you
Just a second.
Yeah.
Come closer to the microphone.
Yeah.
The microphone. Okay. This one.
Yes.
Sergei, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I would be very. First of all, this is fascinating question and research question and very stimulating paper. I would be very interested to see what is inside your sector year country sample effect, because what came to my mind is I would be really intrigued in this because of the question of competition and the cost which is by companies that are not paying bribes. Because what I suspect may be happening if you spell out your fixed effects by using Mundlach specification, what you may get is a negative effect on the average on your cell level with the negative effects you are finding here. So basically, the thing is that they are external cost. So if you are not paying bribe and I am paying bribe, basically then I suffer because simply there is some gain for you and you are the other way around. You suffer because I gain for me and I'm creating an undue competition. So the total cost of bribe may be indirect and may be captured by those cells, and that it may require adjusting your modeling but
yeah.
But this effect may be hidden.
Okay, Sergei, you want to take more questions and combine them, or one by one, whatever is good for you?
Let me take, I don't know, 3 questions altogether, and then we'll talk. Yeah.
So there was the last row, please come here. Sorry, don't know your name. Yes, this mic.
Thank you so much, Sergei, for this presentation. I think I have actually two questions. The first one is a bit related to the previous one. To what extent firm is the proper way of proper unit of analysis here? Because I think when you think about let's say that there's a public procurement, and to get this procurement, you need to pay a bribe. And that, of course, if you pay a bribe, you're going to get this procurement, you're going to observe the sales of growth, the growth of sales. But then the other company may suffer because the company will not get that procurement. So if you kind of aggregate this to a cell, you may actually get a negative effect on sales because, let's say, the less efficient firm will get that contract. So maybe, have you tried to kind of look at this aggregated to a cell? And the second question is, have you also tried to look at profits or value-added set of sales, which is quite, I think, a rough measure of the kind of firm performance?
Jan, maybe you want to answer?
Yeah, Sergei, hi. Well, basically the question is related to the argument whether paying bribes is productive for the firms. You show that there's a positive impact on growth. Essentially, what I'm wondering is if a firm pays, say, $10,000 in bribes to an official, would it increase their sales by more or less than $10,000? Could you say this based on your results or not?
Okay, so Sergei, please, and then we'll take another round.
Right. So let me actually show you something because it has direct. So these are tables from the paper rather than from the presentation. So I fully agree that it would be interesting to look at the level of the industry. And in the model, we shut down this channel. So we don't have competition between firms. If one firm produces more, it doesn't mean that the other firm has a problem with finding customers. So this is, we shut down the channel, and it's simplification, and I fully agree it's an important issue. In the regressions, we do look at what happens at the level of competition. So we do have questions in the survey. What happens if there is more or less competition in the industry or self-reported by the firm? And basically, as you can see in this table, competition itself decreases growth of sales. But interactions with those variables that I mentioned do nothing. And the sample is much smaller because not every firm reports competition. So, so there is this issue. So we don't find any effects of competition. Now, can we look at the level of the industry? As I said, we have 5,000 cells, and once we aggregate to the industry and control for region we need because a lot of corruption happens at the regional level. So we want to make sure that firms face the same corruption environment. So if you look at firm region year, industry region year, you suddenly are down to 5,000 observations, which is actually very little, given that majority of firms don't pay bribes. So these issues become really, really difficult to start. But I take your point. On profits, we actually looked at the outcome measuring impact of profits, and I'm trying to find, okay, another thing, yeah, before going there, another thing is we look at firms which have and do not have government contracts. And firms that have government contracts are fewer, much fewer, but magnitudes are similar. So if you compare columns 1 and 2, where firms do have procurement and they don't, something that was mentioned in terms of maybe this is what matters. This is where the discussion is. Now on profitability as an outcome, we actually did that, and I'm trying to find this in the no, I don't have it in the paper. We didn't find much on profitability as an outcome of corruption. That we didn't find. Now, on Jan's question, in principle, we can check that. And I'm pretty sure that firms given bribes benefit more than they lose. But in terms of profit, that's a different question. So think about this. So if I give bribes, my growth goes up in a high corrupt country by 3 percentage points. I give you a bribe on average of 1%. That's the average bribe, right? I give you on average a bribe of 1%. My growth goes up by 3%. Basically, my sales go up by 3 percentage points more. So I benefit. However, 3 percentage points increase in sales this is not what the bottom line of a shareholder is, right? You need to calculate the profits, and so these things may become complex. So I'm not sure. Among papers that I really like regarding this question, there is a paper on political connections in Italy by Ufuk Akçicit and co-author, which actually does this calculus. And I think they find that when firm recruits politicians, if you look how the surplus is split, 80% goes to the firm, 20% goes to politicians. So that's what they find. We, in principle, can try to do something like this, but this is what I think we have found. So here we are. Thank you.
Thank you. I suggest now we read some questions from the web to not forget our friends who are online. So Elias, please.
It seems that your paper finds a correlation between firms that make some bribes and greater firm growth. Would you say that corruption is a core part of economies? If so, why are many organizations and governments advocating an anti-corruption agenda?
Right. So we get this question a lot. To what extent our results suggest that corruption is good? Well, first and foremost, in low corruption countries, corruption is definitely bad. In high corruption countries, the fact that some firms are extorted bribes to continue to function doesn't mean that corruption is good. Firms that agree to pay bribes may grow faster, but overall, in terms of overall efficiency, of course, it's bad news that some firms suffer from corruption even though they don't pay bribes. And this is a very nuanced argument. So firms who don't pay bribes grow slower, but they also grow slower because of overall average corruption. That's our story. So finding corruption is good. Moving from high corruption environment to low corruption environment is good. And yet another thing I would like to mention is we survey existing firms. We don't show you what would have happened if corruption were lower and many more firms enter. These are missing entrants whom we cannot capture. So if in a low corruption country, suddenly you have emergence of Apples or Tesla, this is not something that we would measure in the data on, say, Russia, because there are no Teslas and Apples in such a corrupt environment. So this is what I mean.
Okay.
And there is a second question. It seems that you are only taking into consideration monetary forms of corruption. Could non-monetary forms of corruption be significant enough to affect any results, such as economy of favors, political influence, or vote buying?
So gifts would work. So our data allow for looking at gifts. So let me try to show you the exact formulation of the question. No, so that's the wrong thing. So let me go to the presentation quickly and show you the formulation of the question. So basically, this is the formulation of the question, which says payments or gifts. So as if you give I don't know, a piece of jewelry to public officials or a dog. In Russian classical literature, one public official said, "I'm not taking bribes in cash, I only accept putty," right? So if you do that, that will be part of it. If a company gives an expensive car or an expensive vacation to public official, ideally it would be part of this. If it's political influence, for example, if I force my workers to vote for you, this will not be captured here. So this is the limitation of this system. So that's where we are.
Okay, let's take another round from the room. 1, 2, please first come here to the microphone. Yes, then here. Then it's Luke.
Sergei, thank you very much. Sandu Kojugaru from the World Bank. So I had an alternative sort of explanation came to mind that you didn't discuss. I was hoping you could react to. So in some sense, this seems consistent, say in a high corruption environment, bribes are a social norm. And so you basically, you have to pay to play, and sort of non-payment is sanctioned, but conditional on sort of not flouting the social norm. It's the less productive firms that are sort of compelled to pay all the time and not have the sales, and so the more productive firms, don't need to do that, and that sort of explains why, sort of as the share of bribes increases, sort of it's associated with low growth. And then in low corruption countries, the social norm is not there, and then basically, the more productive firms, grow faster, and the ones who pay, have negative results. Thank you.
Luca, please.
Is this the
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much for the fascinating presentation. I'm Luca Uberti from the University of Luxembourg. Two quick points. The one has to do with the result, which, if I understood it correctly, the negative effect of bribe payments on the growth of sales once a firm starts paying bribes disappears, or at least becomes statistically insignificant in high corruption countries. Is that correct, that the negative effect disappears at statistically significant levels? So I was wondering, would a possible explanation for this be the fact that in very corrupt countries, firms that pay bribes essentially earn from the bribe seekers something that is at least as valuable as the value of the bribe that they paid, and plus the costs of transacting the bribe? So that leads me to the question, why not extend this analysis into a study of the grease the wheels hypothesis? So would it not be the case that the effects of corruption, even at the firm level, depend critically on the quality of the institutional environment in which bribing takes place? In some institutional environments, firms may get something in return for the bribes they pay, which on net has a positive effect on firm performance. And the second question is, I must say I'm not fully convinced by your overall specification. So you have the log of sales in first differences on the left-hand side, and then you have the log of the number of employees on the right-hand side. I would also include the log of assets of the firm on the right-hand side, just to make, just to have a clean production function of some kind, because otherwise you cannot distinguish whether the effect runs through investment or through productivity. And personally, I would also include the log of sales in levels on the left-hand side, just to make it consistent.
Ilias, last question in this group.
I wonder why you prefer to call non-zero informal payments. Is there a possibility of observing negative informal payments in business transactions?
Okay, thank you. So, Sergei, please.
Thanks. Let me take this question. Yes. So, Alexandra's question about social norm is it's almost the same as our model, where we have this principal who, in corrupt countries, punishes bureaucrats about whom there is a complaint. You can think about, so in the less corrupt countries, there is likely punishment. In more corrupt countries, there is an unlikely punishment. So in principle, instead of the principle, you can say the society, the social norm punishes the bureaucrat. So you are extorted a bribe, you go to the journalist, and reputation kills this bureaucrat in a clean country. And nothing happens in a corrupt country because everybody is corrupt. So in principle, that would be observational equivalent. And you're right. This is something. This is the same story, similar story. We just put it in this way, but you can put it in the social norms way. Now the biggest question is where the social norms come from, and there is a huge literature on this. By the way, everything you want to know about corruption, there is a book which is now 5 years old, but still quite up to date. By my co-author Ray Pittman, called Corruption, What Everyone Needs to Know. and they talk about all these issues and there's some research on this, but Alexander, I fully agree with you. Now, the last question by anonymous attendee about non-zero and negative states. So we don't have data on negative bribes, so we don't know what to do about this. Now, regarding why we look at zero separately, because we just found that, and indeed this relationship is so robust, and as you can imagine, we tried many other things, and we converge on this thing, on this relationship that exactly zero bribe matters. And once you move just a little bit, there is a big change. And so we wanted to talk about this. I mentioned to you that we look at different effects of that, and we look at issues related to complaints about corruption, and look at different characteristics of firms with zero, non-zero bribes. There is a lot of stuff in the paper that we do to understand to what extent this is robust. But it is quite striking that zero versus epsilon is a huge difference. Now, the last question by Luca, so on specification. So a couple of things. We do include lagged assets, lagged sales. We don't include assets because the data are really bad on capital. So that's unfortunately a problem. But since we include logged sales, you can imagine that this is what happens. Now, what we also do, we ask the question: to what extent change in sales is due to change in employment or change in productivity? And since we don't have capital, we only look at labor productivity. And so the answer is most of the effect is through labor productivity, and very little of the effect is through employment. So almost all results are explained by labor productivity. But this is, by the way, it's probably because labor per se is a very slow-moving variable, right? So it's something that doesn't change a lot over time. And I guess our explanation is that bureaucrats, when they take bribes from you, they allow you to go to new markets or charge higher prices, and that's the explanation, which is related to your previous question about greasing the wheel. And in a sense, we do have greasing the wheel as a part of our argument. Now, just to clarify the result of high versus low corruption economies. So in low corruption economies, every additional percentage of bribes is bad for growth. And there is no issue in the discontinuity at zero. When you move from zero to epsilon, it's epsilon bad news for your growth. If you look at high corruption economies, when you move from zero to epsilon, there is a positive jump in your growth, and only then it starts to come down. And the whole story of our model is exactly about greasing the wheel. So this is greasing the wheel. So however, there is a very important part of greasing the wheel here. Is in a normal greasing the wheel argument, the rigidity comes from somewhere else, and then the bureaucrat takes a bribe to help. Here, the bureaucrat intentionally creates the rigidity and says, unless you pay me the bribe, I will not remove the obstacle. So basically, the way you can understand that is, here is a barrier for your business. If you pay me a bribe, the barrier will be gone. If you don't pay me a bribe, you will suffer from rigidity. And these are these zero bribe guys who suffer. And what is important about this is that this barrier is introduced endogenously. And I have a paper published in 2004, which is called Red Tape and Corruption, where I actually model the endogenous emergence of red tape like this. And I strongly believe this is how we should think about this. Red tape is not sent out to bureaucrats from Mars. It emerges within the bureaucracy. And in high corruption economies, of course, this red tape is used to extort bribes. So I'll stop here.
There is time for one urgent question. We already heard a lot. If there is online, nothing? No. Okay, great. So, Sergei, thank you so much. We've been over an hour. I thank you for your patience. Let me thank our keynote speaker with, again, unfortunate not being here, but I think we all learned a lot. Work will continue. We wish you all the best. I guess at Sciences Po you will be busy now with cohabitation, what happens after the French elections. And I would kindly ask you to join me in a final applause for Sergei's lecture.
Thank you very much for interesting questions and discussion. Thank you.